It's like an old married couple in the midst of a heated argument, slugging it out, going back and forth, each one trying to one-up the other one. And finally, life says to death, "You always think you have to have the last word, don't you? Well, not this time. This time, I, life, have the last word." When I was on my sabbatical a number of years ago, I spent a couple weeks in British Columbia at a woodworking school taking a chair-making class. It was right on the coast of, just north of Vancouver, right on the Inside Passage. It was 2 marvelous weeks. And then after that, I planned to meet Miriam and Luke in Seattle, and we were headed to Holden Village, which is a Lutheran retreat center in the Cascade Mountains. But after the class and before I met them in Seattle, I had 5 days. And I decided to spend those days at Mount Rainier National Park, hiking and cycling and just exploring the park. One day, actually the very first day, I woke up and it was bright, clear day, clear sky, and I decided I got to go up on Mount Rainier and do some hiking. And I remember it was just absolutely gorgeous, and I could see all the way to where Mount St. Helens was. Another day, I spent cycling from the entrance of the park where I was staying up to Paradise and then back. It was about 20 miles of climbing, 20 miles down. Halfway up, I ran into Lance Armstrong. Sorry, it's a different story. Another day, I spent driving through the park all the way to the other side to Sunrise so that I could hike over there, and absolutely loved the days that I spent there. But one of my most vivid memories there was a day that I drove through the whole park over to Sunrise. And I stopped partway over there for a short couple of mile hike through a place called the Grove of the Patriarchs. And it was a small area of the park that contained this grove of virgin timber that had never been lumbered. There were huge Douglas fir trees. I mean, they were just massive, this big, wide. And they weren't just a couple hundred years old. Some of them were over 1,000 years old. It was absolutely amazing. But the image that really has stuck with me all these years from the Grove of the Patriarchs is this one big tree that had died and fallen over. And when you looked into the woods, you could just see this long tree all the way. It was a long trunk on the ground, and it obviously died many years ago because it was in a very serious and advanced state of decay. And I imagine if I went up to it, I could just kind of poke my finger through it, kind of like butter. It was so decayed. But the amazing thing was that as I looked down the length of that long tree, down the very center were new trees, all growing up maybe about so high. Death was giving way to life. And I remember also seeing stumps throughout the park, maybe a foot or two high, and again, out of the midst of each of the stumps was a brand new tree that was growing up. Death giving way to new life. It's like an old married couple in the midst of a heated argument, slugging it out, fighting back and forth, each one trying to one-up the other one. And finally, life says to death, "You think you always have to have the last word, don't you? Well, not this time. From now on, I, life, have the last word." At Joppa, there was this older woman by the name of Tabitha. She's actually the only woman in the New Testament who is called a disciple. And her discipleship is in good works and acts of charity. And actually, it's just by chance, but I think it's a very fitting text for Mother's Day. And specifically, she has been caring for those who no one else would care for, a group of widows. And she's caring for them by making clothes for them. But when Tabitha becomes ill and dies, they call for Peter. And when Peter arrives at the scene, he's greeted by all of these weeping widows who show him all of the clothes that Tabitha has made. And with no one left now to protect them and to take care of their needs, these poor, vulnerable women are afraid for the future. And it doesn't look good for them. Tabitha, their protector, has died, and with her dead, these widows are as good as dead. The story opens with death. Great, powerful, tight-fisted death. And these poor women are caught in its grip. But surprise, death doesn't have the final word. As the story moves on, it witnesses to Jesus and Easter's power for life. Peter, staring in the face of death, says, "Tabitha, get up." And we're instantly reminded of when Jesus called Lazarus out of the tomb and back to life. You see, Jesus' disciples have the exact same power over death that Jesus had. Jesus raised Lazarus, Peter raised Tabitha. Into the regions of death where people grieve, Peter spoke a word of life. You thought Easter happened once back a couple thousand years ago. Or you thought Easter happened again a few weeks ago. But surprise, Easter continues. So do you believe it? I mean, we're told that things like this can't happen, that they don't happen. We're told that a dead widow stays dead. We're told that death is the great equalizer and that death always has the final say. And it's not only that we don't believe it's possible that someone can rise from the dead. It's also that we're unsure if there is a power that's let loose in the world, a power for life rather than for death. You see, the problem with this story for us may not be that we doubt that Peter could raise this old woman to life. Rather, we're unsure if we can be raised to life. But be careful, because when the life-giving gospel words are spoken, the dead are raised, and the future is open, and everything makes way for Easter. Here, as old Tabitha is raised to life, we see Easter happening all over again, and we hear words of life spoken boldly, and death, in whatever form it presents itself, is defeated. Where in your life are things fixed and closed and settled and dead? What do you grieve for today? What keeps you lying awake at night? How are you caught in the grip of death? What are you afraid of? Are you afraid of rejection by your peers or of the loss of a special relationship? Are you afraid of failure or of maybe losing your job or not achieving your dreams? Maybe you're afraid of an illness or that you've been recently diagnosed with. Or maybe you're afraid of the cancer or the heart disease that just kind of seems to run in your family. Or maybe you're afraid that something will happen or is happening to someone that you love. How are you caught in the grip of death? But this is Easter. And because of Easter, we proclaim that Jesus has destroyed the power of death. And even though the struggle between life and death continues, death won't have the final word. Life speaks last. It's like an old married couple in the midst of a heated argument, slugging it out, going back and forth, each one trying to one-up the other one. And finally, life says to death, "You think you always have to have the last word, don't you? Well, not this time. I, life, have the last word." You see, we worship the Lord of life who's conquered death for us. We don't need to fear evil and death because Jesus, our good shepherd, has already defeated evil and death for us. We don't need to fear the phone call that wakes us up in the middle of the night, or the illness or the accident, because even when someone dies and it seems like death has the final word, Jesus, our good shepherd, leads us into life and into a joyful reunion with the one that we love. We don't need to fear whatever keeps us up at night because Jesus, our good shepherd, leads us through death to life. And the reality is that we go nowhere that our good shepherd hasn't already gone. However you find yourself caught up in the grip of death, whatever you're afraid of, place it in our good shepherd's loving hands. Take that fear that has you in its grip and imagine yourself handing it over to Jesus, our shepherd. And imagine him taking that fear in his hand and then offering his other hand to lead you and guide you. And prayerfully give your concern to Jesus in the confidence that Jesus, our good shepherd, will lead you into life. Amen.